Hello, you weirdos. Jim here, and welcome back to the Weird Science Comics YouTube channel, where I'm going to be doing a solo review of The Amazing Spider-Man number 62. If you want to hear me do a longer form review with my man Matt, who does the Marvel podcast with me, you can check that out on our podcast feed if you want early access to that. And I'm saying early access, if you're watching this on Wednesday, it'll be coming out later tonight. The actual Marvel podcast comes out early on our Patreon, patreon.com/Weird Science, with a lot of other things. In this week's podcast, we're talking about The Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Boy, and also a little bit West Coast Avengers. But here we are, The Amazing Spider-Man number 62. It's The 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, Part 2, Out of Space, written by Joe Kelly, with pencils by Ed McGuinness. And I will read the recap, because it'll let everybody know what's going on and actually gives you a little more information, something that drives me nuts. But Dr. Doom, Earth's new Sorcerer Supreme, has chosen Spider-Man to be the new champion against the 8 Scions of CYTTORAK, a mantle previously held by Dr. Strange. While Sorcerer Supreme, Strange agreed to periodically battle the Scions in exchange for some of the god CYTTORAK's power to protect the Earth. Okay. Armed with a new arcane armor and 8 life-restoring reeds of Ragador, Spider-Man must figure out how to keep the Scions from destroying Earth or die trying. He's probably going to do that a lot. And ends up continuing. He has used 1 extra life and only has 7 remaining. And now he's broken into Doctor Strange's house. How did he pull that off? I mean, he just did. They don't really go into that. And really what this is, there's a really bad juxtaposition of a world-ending just crisis going on, while Joe Kelly wants to have Peter, Spider-Man, just laugh it up. I mean, it does feel like he's working on material to appear at the Laugh and Brew Wednesday night and open mic night. And it just gets a little bit annoying. You can't really settle down in the idea that this is a big, meaningful story when Peter himself doesn't take it seriously. And there's a lot of people, when they ended up watching the video, reading last issue, had mentioned the idea that, first off, Peter, even if these are demons or whatever, he wouldn't be so cavalier about killing people. And also, this feels like a stopgap story. This feels like a story that's set up till they get the next run of Spider-Man. It felt like that last issue. This issue really does feel like that. One of the reasons I think that is true is because, say, Nick Spencer, then Zeb Wells, when you actually start a new run, lately you've had a new number 1. And they didn't. It reminds me of the Beyond stuff that happened after Nick Spencer's run into then the number 1 issue of Zeb Wells' run. So also problems with this is that some of the things that happen in this issue don't quite jive with what we had with Zeb Wells, which may not be a horrible thing, but you also end up getting Black Cat in this. And if you were reading Zeb Wells' run, like I unfortunately was, you had a couple issues right after Dark Web. I think they were like 18, 19, 19, 20, around that area, where you had Peter and Felicia go off to a snow chalet, a little couple's retreat, running into, unfortunately, Mary Jane and Paul. And Felicia was written horribly there. She's written worse here. And again, this is supposed to be an end of world situation. This is some dire, stakes here. And Peter just can't get past himself of yucking it up. So we start off, and yes, Peter and Black Cat, with the astral projection of Doctor Strange, are in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And they're practicing. And the idea of that recap, how do you get in there? Well, either they just broke in or the astral projection. What does it matter? You end up where Peter just cannot keep himself from just joking around. Like this is all just a game to him. And Felicia's written horribly. I like the art. It's very cartoony. One of the things I said last issue was it kind of plays body horror at a point, at least last issue when Peter died and then came back. You don't even get that here. And so you don't even get Doom here. And really, again, this just feels like maybe a story that was thrusted on Joe Kelly. Hey, here's an idea. 8 Deaths of Spider-Man sounds like a cool title. Go for it. And then Joe Kelly's like, I think I'm just going to joke around. So it just plays out odd. Felicia's there to remind Peter, hey, I'm single, ready to mingle. Peter says, I have a girlfriend right now, but maybe I'll call you later. And then she skedaddles. She just gets out of there. It also serves to do a bit of recap, get everybody up to speed with the reads and things like that. But in the meantime, it's a little better than the beginning of last issue. Last issue with the cold open with that guy Kevin falling from a skyscraper. I still think that he might be a window washer. We have him in this issue. Joe Kelly's trying to make Kevin a thing. I don't think he's going to be a thing. But they don't tell us what his job was. I swear to God, he has to be a window washer. But you end up with this opening. At least it's kind of tying into the story. You see that Peter is training, but he's goofing around. We do then go to the Crimson Cosmos, and we get to see the scions of Cyttorak, the children of Cyttorak. And at least this sets up a little bit of a tone. You end up having these scions, they're fighting. Each one wants to prove their worth to Cyttorak so they can end up, destroying Earth, ruling Earth, whatever it would be. And you do get something there. It's not great, but at least it's a little bit of the world building that we might need in this. I just need more of everything, though, and less of everything, kind of, if that makes any sense. Because then we go back and Peter is, studying the book of Cyttorak. He's trying to get this whole deal down while he's eating pizza with Norman Osborn. Now, if you remember, at one point, Zeb Wells kind of mucked it up with Norman. Peter was working with Norman at Oscorp. Then Norman said to Peter, listen, you deserve to be paid. You don't have to show up. I'm just going to pay you. It was a way so that Peter would just have money and not have to keep bopping in to Oscorp. Then you had the Goblin stuff. And at the end of that, at the end of Zeb Wells' run, you did end up having Peter kind of on outs with Norman saying, screw you. It felt weird even then. But then we get to this and here he is. He's just drinking coffee while Peter's studying, eating pizza and saying, I'm going to give up Oscorp. I'm like, I don't get it. I don't know. This, again, feels like some little bit of nugget here that will be part of what the next run will be. I think we might get a bunch of these little nuggets here to see what happens later. In the meantime, you have Peter's like, oh no, Aunt May, I was supposed to be at Feast. Again, sad sack Peter. It's scattered brain Peter. And he goes to go out there. First off, Aunt May has to have it enough with him. He lost a bunch of the money that was supposed to go to the feast. Now he's late. And Peter opens the door to leave the apartment. And boom, he goes through a portal into City Field to fight the Scion Cyperion. The Scion Cyperion. That's a bit of a rhyme. I'll tell you, first off, City Field nonsense. The idea that Peter's like, man, my favorite team. I know he's a Mets fan. I try to ignore that. Peter's a smart guy. Why? I just don't get it. But you end up where he starts to fight the Cyperion. Cyperion can teleport things around, and the big play here. And I didn't know this was going to be like, hey, when the Scions show up, they set these rules. And hey, this time we're going to play hopscotch. Now we're going to go and we're going to do a limbo. He says, if you touch me in a non-sexy way, you win. But the problem is, as you get close to him and try to touch him, he teleports you away. You kind of play Portal, all these deals going on. So Peter has to figure out how he can do this as they're kind of in a bit of a gridlock here. They're locked down and at one point even have this kind of bubble around them on City Field. I'll tell you, I would imagine that this is happening during the World Series, because the Mets aren't there. So you end up where all this going down, you have Peter figure something out. And this does go along the route of showing that Peter's a smart guy. Though the way it plays out in the comic book, it's a little bit convoluted and it takes a bit of explaining that you're just like, come on, let's get to it. And by the end, I'm like, okay, I don't really think that it jives completely of what you were saying, but at least we're out of here. Because he ends up saying, in time space, if you end up in space and fly one direction, you'll eventually double back and come back. So he figures, okay, what I'll do. And he had a little bit of training where he knows this Scion. He knows that Cyperion will do wacky things and not really pay attention to what is going on. He's big on his powers, but he's not really paying attention to them, and he makes them go micro level to then go so small that what Peter says is if we keep going so small, then I'll double back and come back real big as a separate entity. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And why didn't Cyperion? And so what ends up happening is a big giant space Spider-Man ends up there and he kind of puts his finger, I almost said he fingered him. I didn't want to get that sexy. He puts his finger down and crushes Cyprian. So he touches him, also crushes him. But in the meantime, he also kills himself. I don't know how that works. And then you get quickly Coulson, who says, I don't know what to say other than hang in there, hero. Boom. And he's back. You don't have that body horror. He's not coming out of the swamp like Solomon Grundy. He's just boom. Suddenly he's at a dinner date with Shay and Robbie or Randy. Randy is there talking about this photography agent thing. I don't even get it. What are they talking about? But he's like, man, you got to get with us, Space Cadet Peter. We're going to get a new job. We're going to do all this. And Shay's like, yeah, you got to get yourself out there and get a new job. I'm like, okay, Shay's okay. She's not as bad as Paul, but really she ends up at this point. She's just kind of generic. I like kind of the crap talk she does a little. I liked it more last issue, but in this, she's just like, oh, you know, job hunting and disappointing Aunt May. Those are you. So we go from that. Now, this is where I said about Kevin. This Kevin guy, he's there talking to some lady going, man, me and Spider-Man, scariest day of my life other than getting married. And then the lady goes, oh, you, I swear, Kevin. And I talked, obviously, I said earlier, I talked with Matt about this on our Marvel podcast. He had no idea what was going on here. One of the problems is that Kevin at this point looks exactly like Coulson. So you're wondering what, but it is Kevin. Kevin isn't a thing. Kevin's not going to be a thing. Kevin, if he's a thing, I'm done because it's ridiculous. But you just end up having this whole conversation. Then boom, Peter ends up getting Spidey sense and sees this little demon girl on a bike showing up. It seems to be one of the twins, the girl that we saw earlier in this guise. Again, this is why I said, what are they going to play? Hopscotch, a little kickball. It's pretty good at kickball back in the day. But it's just whatever. You end up, and again, Peter died, so we have to use another read. So in 2 issues, you haven't mixed it up at all. I know it's just 2, but maybe mix it up the second one so we kind of don't get this kind of generic outline that we're like, okay, he's just going to each issue run into one, boom, use a read, come back. I mean, at one point you would hope or think that he'll have to use more than one read. He keeps, what ends up happening is he's not being killed by these demons. He ends up dying while he wins the competition. You're going to have a point where he ends up having to use a couple lives to win one of these contests. Though, if they kill him, does that mean they lose? You know what I mean? If the demon ends up killing Peter, Spider-Man, does that mean that they won and it's over, even though he has the reads? Or can he come back? These are gray areas, but you need something like that. You can't just have every time Peter saying, okay, I'm going to figure out wacky ways to die as I win, or it's just going to keep going, just generic. In the meantime, again, Peter is either sad sack, scatterbrain Peter, or he is, hey, I cannot say 3 words without joking. And it really makes this feel like what it is. It seems like a stopgap. It doesn't feel big. It has no stakes. And I know that people will be like, well, it doesn't have to. It's set up to be big. Make it feel big, even if it's just kind of goofy. Make it feel big within the story. And Joe Kelly can't. He's just yuckity yuck. So much dialogue. So many crazy jokes. It feels, again, more like a Deadpool. And even if you don't agree with that, Peter would take this more seriously in my mind. It's ridiculous. But with that, I still liked it more than last issue. Maybe it was because that cold open last issue was just so bad. So I'm going to give this a 5.5 out of 10. I'm wondering what people think. I had some people disagree with what I thought last issue. One guy basically said that any review that doesn't like Spider-Man, it's because everybody's haters. No. This is my opinion. That's what you do when you review things. You talk about it, give the opinion, and then wonder what everybody else thinks. Everybody doesn't have to agree, but just because you like it doesn't mean I'm a hater, because I could say you're a shill, which I think this guy was. So overall, though, I like the art. A little cartoony, but it works, and it's just not great. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, if you want to hear a longer review where me and my man Matt lose our minds a bit, you can go and listen to our Marvel podcast. Comes out every week. Also, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/weirdscience for more. shows, a lot of things going on there. Just go check it out. All the links are in the description, and I will talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.